Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 105. We have a special guest we'll introduce later, Mr. David Evans, and we're going to be talking all things Arctic and reindeer and Lapland orientated, and probably a bit of wine conversation in there and plenty of chats about auroras. But we'll have a bit of a chinwag with the fellas. We've got Luke and Ben and myself on tonight. Personally, I've been pretty busy, and this is actually partly why I'm super excited to have David on to head to the Arctic for the first time myself. I'm running a photographic tour on the Polar Pioneer in Svalbard for 10 days in mid-May. And for any late adventure wanderers, there is actually a couple of berths free, I believe. We just had a big meeting last night with all the crew, and we're getting pretty excited about how that's all setting up. I was looking at the infrared maps of the ice caps and the movements, and a good friend of ours, Rita Kluge, who we've had on the show, has just been up there, actually just got back last week. I think Josh Hoko is up there. I think Ignacio is up there right now, Ignacio Palacios. So it's must be the place to be. It's one of the fastest places, changing places in the world with climate change. So it's a bit of a potent time and a potent kind of opportunity to use photography is in that conversation around climate change. So I'm hopefully going to use some of the images I get from that to support some of the research and things going on there. So I'm doing a sneaky side trip to Iceland, and Lukey had the idea that before the show I should put out a shout out and see if someone wants to come with me and do Absolutely. A semi kind of exploration workshop kind of thing. And I didn't have time to put anything together, but I'll shout it out loud. I'm going to go from the 19th to the 26th of May, and I'm open to doing absolutely everything I possibly can in that time. And if anyone wants to join or share a camper or have a wild exploratory time with yours truly, then reach out. I think I've found one person who's up there already that I'm going to connect with, and I'm going to meet up with Serena Zenis when I'm there, local Australian legend who lives and breathes everything in Iceland. And I'm hoping to meet Ragnar Axelsson as well through a invitation by Roger Fisherman, who's been on the show. Roger may be there, I'm hoping. Watching Chris Burkhardt for years doing crazy bike journeys through there, and it's taken me 20 years to get there. It's a pilgrimage, I think, for all landscape photographers to get to Iceland. It's pretty busy these days. I'm slightly off on shoulder season, but it's going to be amazing. And I've lined up a 5.5-hour flight with a local pilot to hopefully get some of the best aerial shots of my life as well. And I'm also potentially getting roped in to do another 4,000 kilometer flight around South Australia with Tim Raitt and David Darlenberg literally next weekend. I'm trying to figure out if I can squeeze it in the budget, because the budget for Iceland is just off the show. It's like $3,000 for the cheapest, smallest camper I could possibly find for a week. It's like, oh my God. But anyway, so I'm trying to think if I'm going to be that greedy or not and pull it off. But we're also getting our Altitude South exhibition together, and that's set up for the Barossa Valley in mid-June. And I'm literally flying back straight from this trip to the night before the opening for the exhibition. And we'll be running an artist talk and a workshop on aerial photography there as well, which we're just putting together now. So busy beavers on my end, more about preparation. And then Friday morning, I'm looking at going up to shoot some Vegas. I've managed to miss it for about 5 years in a row, and it's just starting to hit. I know Lukey and I have been talking about that quite a lot. Lukey, you're hoping to hit it up?
Yeah, I'm hoping to get through a whole bunch of work beforehand, but yeah, there's a few spots that I've been very keen to get to, and knowing Tassie's weather, it's looking like we've probably got a window of a couple of days that'll actually be reasonable weather to do something. And outside of that, I mean, it's still any day in the Tassie bushes is an amazing day, but there's definitely some pretty low cloud and rain, which should make it pretty hard for the grand landscapes that I like to photograph. But there are some nice little patches there. So certainly want to be Johnny on the spot and try and get myself into the right places. And I'm a bit like yourself. I tend to be away a lot during this time. I find April's one of the busiest times for photography just in general, in terms of all of the different opportunities. And I think a lot of businesses as well tend to be all firing for needing things at this time as well. So it's definitely nice to have a bit of time to do some exploring and hopefully get some nice photographs that I can get to as well.
Yeah, for people that didn't know, we've talked about it on other shows, but Fagus is basically there's one deciduous plant in Tasmania that's indigenous, and it only really grows in alpine areas in these tiny little pockets, and it's incredibly photogenic, but it literally can last less than 2 weeks between its turn and its disappearance, and one big storm can just rip it all off, and it's kind of a bit of a holy grail for Tassie photographers this time of year. Literally around Anzac Day, in and around by a few weeks, it's generally around that, but you can literally miss it by days, or the pocket you go to was already gone the week before, or vice versa, and nobody really knows until you go out and give it a go. So we're probably going to roll the dice and head up this weekend and see what we get. Ben, how have you been, mate? You've recovered from your last big non-sleeping landscape adventure. I shouted out Ben today for an absolutely stunning image that he's created with, what was it, a 24 image stack with a 200mm lens or something, focus stack.
Yeah, it was an intense one. So yeah, it was a pretty wild weekend. So I shot a wedding on Friday, a 10-hour wedding, finished at 11:30. And then another great Sydney photographer, Maddie Hopkins, picked me up at 11:30. We pretty much drove through the night to Bermagui and didn't sleep, went to sunrise. I was awake for about 26 hours straight, which was, pretty brutal. And I won't be doing that again anytime soon, but it was good fun. Catching up with a couple of other photographers from interstate, Lyle Cuthbert and Michael Kenny, who I'm good mates with. So yeah, it was a good time. I probably wasn't super productive because conditions weren't super conducive for seascapes. It was pretty either completely clear or completely socked in with cloud. But yeah, had a lot of good exploring, checking out different sections of the coast that we hadn't seen yet. There's so many hidden gems along that Sapphire Coast in New South Wales, which for those who aren't familiar with the term Sapphire Coast, that's where kind of what's it called? Camel Rock and Horsehead Rock are located. There's much more to that coastline than just those two icons. So yeah, we checked out a few new spots, but yeah, the one sort of keeper I came away with was this like 250mm detail of these little pools of water between cool rock, reflecting some golden sunrise light. And yeah, it was about an 18 to 20 image focus stack, which I just chucked into Helicon focus and it did it for me, which is nice and easy. But yeah, I was really stoked with that came out. I've been wanting to get something like that for a while, play with, reflections and color contrast and everything. So came away with something.
And there it is there. Just so,
I was going to say, can we put it up? Oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah. It's so surreal, Ben. I'm just really, really taken by this, mate. Like you can
thank you.
Wander through it front to back. It plays with the planar kind of perspective really strongly. It's such an elegant combination of color hues. It's sexy as all hell, mate, to be honest.
Thank you. I wasn't sure of how literal, like it would be immediately interpretable, if that's a word. I had someone say they had no idea what they were looking at when to me, because I know what was going on of the context of the scene, it's quite clear to me. But yeah, it's always funny with a shot like that, whether people kind of grasp onto it immediately or if it takes them a second to kind of figure out what's happening. So, which is kind of the beauty of that style of photography, is why I'm so enraptured by it. So, I'm just proud of something that just popped in my mailbox yesterday. I'll see if the camera, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There we go. So this 286-page book is half a year of my life. Co-writing it with Ignacio Palacios, and as a foreword by me. Introduction by Adam Williams, commentary by Peter Eastway all the way through. It's a very, very involved, in-depth exploration of all the structure and underpinnings of what defines a really striking, powerful, and award-winning image. So Ignacio reached out at the beginning of COVID and asked me, because he's always been a fan of my writing, to come on board as the writer and editor of sorts to pull quite an ambitious project together. And he released it as ebooks, and then we're so happy with how it came out. And the feedback, he's actually given me an advanced copy of a hard copy, and we've blended two of the books together into one, and it's a hell of a series. And he's doing a fundraising campaign at the moment, or just a crowdfunding campaign to get it over the line to get it all in print. And I just showed it to Lukey last night or yesterday, and I'm quietly proud of that. It was sort of been a few years since I sort of
well, it's rare that you get something of that caliber and length as a legacy piece that's going to sort of probably stick around longer than me. And I've never done anything quite like it. And Dex Dower Dykstra, who's our good friend and a big part of the team on the show, did all the design work on it, and it's freaking amazing. So I might put a link to something like that if anybody's interested, because if you really want to dig deep on and get a really wrap your head around the kind of elements and structures and design choices and compositional things and conversations about light and narrative and emotion and feel, right down to a very applicable technical level as well. It's a very, very rich resource. I've poured every single bit of knowledge I've had from 15 years of judging all around the world into this book to give people a bit of insight into what a lot of us feel makes a really successful and powerful and memorable image. So wasn't expected to talk about that, but I realized my computer was sitting on top of it, and I saw it under the computer. I thought, wait a minute, talking about news for the week, that just arrived in the mail. So anyway, probably enough about us, I think. I'm pretty keen to let Mr. David Evans have the floor. David is a very multi-talented photographer based in Adelaide. We've been friends for quite a long time. He's a master of photographer, double gold bar, which we can't add to anymore, can we, David? But we can hold on to those distinctions. David won the AIPP Landscape Photographer of the Year in either 2015 or 16, I think, and also the highest scoring print in Australia at the same time. Thank you very much. And that was actually, I believe, with a folio of work from Lapland, which I got reminded of when I was writing the brief for the show. David is also the curator and founder, and he runs the International Pano Awards, which is the largest panoramic photography awards in the world. And actually, funny enough, just this week, I got chosen along with Tom Pudd and Mika Boynton to be ambassadors for the awards under Epson's banner and have really deep sort of conversations and profiles on being judges and what it's like to enter and the whole process of where this award sits sort of globally. And they just got released, was it yesterday or the day before, I think, David? So they'll slowly be coming out individually. And yeah, I flew out of Melbourne, and these super professional team did about 12 hours of shooting they spent an entire day reefing locations. These guys are amazing. So they make us look good, basically. But it's a good nod in the direction of one of the great competitions in the world, and certainly the leading one of its kind in terms of the panoramic genre. David is also the co-founder of the International Landscape Photographer of the Year contest with Peter Eastway. So he's a man of many talents. He's also a part-time professional wine taster, as you'll probably see him at work tonight during the show, having great sips as well. And he runs incredible tours into Lapland. He's also a very well-established a commercial photographer on a lot of different realms. And I also noticed, David, you talk about a little bit later, one of the, I don't know if it's quite where the committees you're on in terms of well-being and health, and how that photography has a role on that I'm really interested to talk about that as well. But that's a little bit enough for me. I'll probably put David on the spot now, as it always feels when somebody waves your flag for you. It's not very Australian to listen to a trumpet and then walk straight into the room afterwards. But credit where credit's due, my friend. Really wonderful to finally get you on the show.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. I know you've asked me before, but I just couldn't swing it on the particular day, but all the stars aligned this week. So it's great to be here.
So Dave, you're just back from a trip, yeah?
Yeah. So two trips. January I spent in Swedish Lapland, and most of March I spent in Finnish and Norwegian Lapland. So two separate sort of trips and tours. So yeah. So
I guess we've already thrown that word around, but a lot of people may or may not understand what that means or where that kind of means. You're giving away a hint with a couple of countries, but my understanding is that it actually spreads over 3 or 4 countries even, the name of the region. And I'm not even sure where the name even comes from.
Yeah. So long before there were countries, it's the description of the sort of the native region stretching across the top within the Arctic Circle, across the top of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And it's the native people, the Sami, S-A-M-I, with an accent on the A. and their land is called Sapmi, Sapmi, and it's just collectively known as Lapland because they're sort of nomadic people in terms of reindeer herding, and so they would generally cross, across borders to herd their reindeer until the borders became borders, and some of them became hard borders, and they've sort of had to settle more permanently up there. But
So
yes.
predates the nation borders of the other countries by the sounds of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is it just one people? It's such a large area. Are there fractions or different kind of subversions of that?
Yeah, yeah, there are. Well, now, of course, they're sort of based in the different areas in different countries. I think there's over 300 Sami languages. So
Oh,
to
wow.
give you an idea about, how fragmented they actually are. Some Samis can't understand others, but of course now they all also speak English, Swedish, Norwegian, Russian, and Finnish. So we're sort of more talking, a while ago, but there were still nomadic Samis in the 60s. So it's relatively recent that a lot of them actually settled down and started living in houses, basically.
It's funny, David, when you talked about the number of dialects or languages, I instantly thought of the parallel with Indigenous people here in Australia who also live nomadically and also have more than 300 different kind of languages in one landmass. Like, I wonder if that's just indicative of the smaller bands and a nomadic kind of lifestyle that somehow that makes a consistent single language impossible, or it somehow is a parallel. And it also makes me think a little bit of the North American Indians in terms of their lifestyle following the bison. And it sounds like the Sami's lifestyle was very much about following the herds of the reindeer as their main source of probably everything, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's all reindeer based. Pretty much everything can be traced back to reindeer for the Sami, and so therefore for the settlement of the whole region. It's sort of it ties into pretty much everything they do. So it's quite interesting in that respect that it's there's no, well, in Sweden anyway, there's no such thing as a wild reindeer. They're all owned by a particular Sami family, but yet they're not fenced, except if they're sick or young. So they're sort of wild herds, but they're all sort of looked after in more of a sense than just hunting wild animals. So it's quite interesting.
Is the population of reindeer still pretty significant?
Yeah, it is, but it's competing a lot now against other interests like mining and forestry and so on. But the Samis do have a voice to parliament, which is helpful. I would say they're not doing too badly politically, but they've come a long way because they were really persecuted up until I think probably the 70s, maybe even the 80s, and now it's become a source of national pride to be identify with the Sami culture. So it's sort of flipped around quite a bit, which is good. It's really good to see.
So out of the four countries of Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Russia, do some sort of identify or support that Indigenous population more than others, or is it?
Yeah, I think so. Having just been in Sweden and Finland, I think they're both pretty supportive. Russia's sort of been cut off now largely, which is hard for the Sami in northern Norway and northern Finland as well, just because they didn't really observe the nationalities so much, and there are Russians married to Finns and all that sort of thing. They had to kind of choose a spot to stay, so that's particularly hard. But yeah, anyway, back to your question about being supported. I've seen the parliament in northern Sweden, and when I'm there, I can't help but keep my ear to the ground with the local politics and news and so on. And, it's interesting. I think if you make a comparison to Australia and you know, the representation of Indigenous people in Australia, they're far more advanced.
Mm.
But they would say they're not. But I think that they're actually a really good example of how it can be done. Well, they're on the right track anyway. They've got a long way to go.
So if we take a step back, David. I mean, you're down here living in Australia, and it's a very long way away. What's your relationship with that part of the world, and how did it begin, and how did it come to be such a rich and consistent part of your life?
Yeah. So I'll try and make it reasonably short, but my grandmother, before she died, did a lot of work on our family history. And for a long time, I think just based on some of her physical qualities, she thought maybe there was some Maori or something in the family at some point. She had this very olive skin, very white hair, and she kind of just, I don't know, she had some sort of inkling. But anyway, she looked into her family history long before the internet and genetic testing. And she actually found a lot of family history in Finland, and also Sweden by marriage. And she wrote this book on it and sort of connected the family tree together. And of course, we picked up where she left off, especially my dad and stepmom, who were very much into the genealogy side of the family, to the point where they'll travel overseas and visit, you know, graves and all sorts of things. And now with genetic testing, obviously we can all find out in more detail. So I was just curious about a lot of the resemblance in the family seemed to, we couldn't really pick it. So in 2011, I went to Finland in summer, it was, and traveled through Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And it really struck me, some of the family resemblance, just walking down the street in Helsinki. I met someone on a bus who could have been my uncle, and I saw the girl in the shop could have been my cousin. And, you know, it was just, I realized that even though we've got strong family history in Wales and, you know, other countries as well, the physical appearance side of things was very Scandinavian. Maybe not so much for me, but for other members of the family. So I sort of got interested in, and I was quite interested in going back in winter, but I didn't really get an opportunity until I started the tours. But that sort of came about because I was helping Tom Putt run a lot of his workshops in Australia at the time. This was, you know, he was one of the first to really pioneer the workshop in that way. And this was like, you know, 2008, 2009 kind of thing. And I wanted to put together a sort of a tour of my own at the time. It took me a while, but the idea was that I wanted to create something that was completely different for Australians than what they would experience here in Australia. And I still hadn't been in winter to Scandinavia, so I just contacted a local guide who'd been recommended to me, and he said, well, if you come over in 2 weeks' time, I've got a tour running, we've got, you know, some space, just come over and see what you think. So I hopped on a plane. It was about 2 weeks before Christmas.
Right.
And it was just brilliant. And I took a bunch of photos and wrote a sort of a travel article. And, you know, being naive, just sent it straight to the editor of you know, the, what do you call it, News Corp's travel section, the Sunday paper. And she published it. She actually, her reply was,
wow.
literally, she said, you've got balls sending an article unpublished to an editor, to a national travel editor. But I happened to read it and I'm going to publish it. So once she published that, and with photos, you know, the rest is history. So it gave us a good start. And it was pretty much everything I wanted it to be. And at the same time, I was really exploring the region not for the first time, but in different seasons as well. And I was getting just as much of a thrill out of the photography as I was out of all the heritage and the culture and the Sami culture. And, you know, the languages, even though I still find it impossible to speak Finnish or very much Swedish. But yeah, I've just found it's a journey now that's been going on for, oh, first went there in 2011. So since then, so it's something that's probably going to take a couple of decades to kind of play out. But you know, these things that you enter into and you kind of, you know, there's like these vortexes, but you don't realize you're in the vortex and you kind of just move in that direction in your life.
Yeah. I've been watching it sort of from afar, become
Yeah.
a longer and deeper sort of part of your life over the last sort of
Yes.
decade. I got a slight parallel. I'm actually quarter Swedish. My grandfather's a Peterson, and
Right.
that's the most mysterious part of my family because he was gone before I was born, and very occasionally we'll get a distant cousin or somebody doing the genealogy tracking me down, and I've always felt this. You know, I've always been a fascination for Vikings and Nordic kind of storytelling, and even in some dreams. And I think there's something to genetics, you know, that
Yeah.
that connects you to a land and a country and a place. So I'm a little bit curious what you know, next month when I go through to see if it starts one of those processes for me, mate, like it has for you.
It does. That's right. It does kind of feel like home in many ways when I go there. I don't know why. You know, the food agrees with me, and just I don't know, the culture. It's just something about it. It does pull you. But I wouldn't say even a majority of my genes are from there. And the Swedish is by marriage, but still, it's like, you know, I don't know. I don't know how much of it is imagined and how much is, you know.
Well, it kind of doesn't matter in a way. If it just
No.
feels rich and it feels good, then just trust that.
Yeah. So it's been, you know, I don't really want to use the phrase, but it's been a journey, I guess. And, you know, I just really enjoy showing other people. The thrill that I get from that is pretty big. Especially, or three things really. One, I never tire of seeing other people see the Northern Lights for the first time, like in a big way. Two, people don't really realize how beautiful the landscapes are, especially in Swedish Lapland, because everyone's attracted to Norway because it's kind of a grand sort of place. But Sweden's, you know, a little bit more off the radar of a lot of people, especially in winter, and that's what makes it really special. Especially because it's really, you know, it feels like we've got it to ourselves. And three, the food. People just don't expect the food will be so good and the quality of food will be so high and it will be so local, you know, that all the dishes will be so particular in terms of the different meats or berries or whatever. The Swedes are very proud of their food culture. And I think up north in Lapland, they're particularly proud of the local produce. So those three things in particular. The cold is incredible, like as in incredibly cold, but you know, it's
what sort of temperatures are we talking about, David?
When it's like when we go in January to Sweden, which is when we usually go, it can range from, if it's warm, it's -5, average probably -15 to -20.
Oof.
And this season just gone, we got to -32. That was during the day. So we were out doing stuff. And the very first year I ran an official tour, it was the second day, it was -43.5.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Lukey, what's the coldest you've been in? Like, I don't think, does Antarctica get as cold as that? Like,
Oh, I think I've been pretty cold, and I mean I've definitely been below -10 in Tassie, but I remember when I was in Oslo it was -20, but it was warmer in Iceland. I think they have a Gulf Stream or something there that keeps it, and also Lofoten Island, Lofoten Peninsula, where I was traveling as well, was, even though that's right up there, they seem to have it a bit warmer as well. So I think it's when you go inland. David probably knows it more so from the that all works.
Just
but
trying to learn about the topography. Like we just had a meeting last night with some of the experts from Svalbard, and it's -1 to 2 that's the range of temperature from the cold to the hot. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, this is just I just thought I'd bring up a map just to get a bit more idea of what we're talking about in terms of from a geography perspective. Because
yeah, great. Yeah,
you kind of got well, that's the North Pole's in here somewhere, isn't it? So
So
yeah,
that's Svalbard to the north, and then
Svalbard's up here, and
Archipelago
then
there, and then
Iceland's over here. And then
Greenland
you've
to
got,
the west.
yeah, Norway, Sweden, Finland through here, and so the Arctic Circle comes through. I think it's sort of in around this sort of zone here. So, and that's the Lapland area. So, if you're out on the more towards the ocean, it's going to be a little warmer. But if you're inland, you don't have the ocean temperatures to
Right. Yeah.
to keep you to protect or buffer you, I suppose. I'd imagine. So,
Yeah.
That must be up there with the coldest places on Earth, surely.
Yeah, I think so. So if you zoom in, when we go to Sweden, we're generally around Kiruna, which is over, just there. And we also, so we're around there and also out towards Abisko, which is up, it's a lake,
up
sort
here.
of northwest, there we are. And we also pop over into Norway if we can. The reason why we go to Abisko, so Kiruna we go to because there's actually a very large mine there. It's an iron ore mine. It's one of well, it's the world's largest underground iron ore mine, but it's also one of the oldest. So it's been there over 100 years, and it means that the town is very well serviced by 737s and
So it's a good access point.
it's a good access point. But if you go outside of Kiruna, 10 minutes, you're in the wilderness. So it's a really good spot to start. The reason why we go to Abisko, it's about 90-minute drive, is because first of all, our local guide, Peter, he was the first guide I contacted, and he's somewhat of a Aurora whisperer.
I've never heard that term before.
He's a bit of a legend in the area, actually, because he used to be a research scientist in Abisko, which is where there's a research station, and his PhD was in climate science, looking at lake sediments, of which there are a lot in the area. And then he became a full-time photographer because it sort of just interested him a bit more. And now he not only does photography, but he films documentaries for Netflix and so on. But he lives down on the coast in Sweden, but also he's got a cabin in Abisko. So in terms of local knowledge and equipment and snowmobile and stuff like that, he's just brilliant. But he also just has a sixth sense for the aurora. And Abisko is known as one of the best places in the whole world to see the aurora because it's right underneath the aurora oval.
Gotcha.
But also that lake there, it generally freezes over when we're there, but it creates like a rain shadow. So as the weather comes over from the west and across the mountains of Norway, it tends to open up when it gets to that lake, Tornaträsk. And the key in that region is not so much whether you're going to get an aurora. I think the chances of getting an aurora in the middle of winter are about 73% on any given night. But the key is getting clear sky. And so one of the clearest places in the whole of Lapland is that lake. So that's kind of our secret weapon, I guess, and not so much of a secret because they used to close in winter, and apparently a couple of decades ago, some Japanese tourists came and knocked on the door of the tourist station there, and caretaker was there, and they said, can we stay? Haven't you heard that this is one of the best places in the world to see the Northern Lights? And they sort of cottoned onto this and ended up opening year round. And now, of course, winter's one of the more common times to go.
It doesn't look like a very big place either.
No, it's tiny. It's tiny.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people, but there'd only be a couple of hundred.
So Dave, is it pretty much just covered in snow the whole time you're there in January?
Yeah. More snow in away from. So the further you get towards Norway, the less snow there is. Although as Australians, we would say it's a lot of snow, but it sort of gets thicker inland. Because the weather tends to sort of dump it a bit more. But yeah, I mean, there's meters of snow. I think in Abisko it's like a meter, but further inland around Kiruna it might be, I don't know, I want to say 2 or 3 meters. Wow. It's not like 8 meters in Lake Tahoe, but it's a lot of snow. Certainly enough to have fun in, because we also do like dog sledding and reindeer sledding and snowmobile.
Well, I was surprised when I was looking through. I've never heard of reindeer sledding. I've certainly seen dog sledding. I thought,
It's
yeah,
like-
right.
It's pretty unique, and there's a guy there called Nils Nutti, and he was like the Laplander of the year. They have these awards, and like he's like he's a complete champion for the Sami culture in the region, and he's a big local identity. So he runs this reindeer sledding business, and we do it with him because there's nowhere else in the world you can do it this way. It's like stand-up sleds. You sort of almost catch your own reindeer, and you get one reindeer per sled per person, and you've got to drive your reindeer. You've got to like make it go, and we go out for the best part of a day into the forest, and it's quite amazing. And on some days the reindeer do exactly what they're meant to do and follow each other and so on, and on other days they just do everything wrong, but that makes it quite hilarious and quite fun because they just want to run off into the forest. And it's kind of like they're not really very bright creatures, so when they get their groove on, it's really nice and gentle and quiet, and they don't smell like dogs do with with their
They must have really different
Well, they-
personalities to dogs.
they
Like I'm
do.
wondering about
They're
the
kind of like-
training that's needed for them or the management to turn them into,
Well,
sledders, as it
they're
were.
kind of like really skinny cows. Like they just it takes 3 or 4 years to train a reindeer to pull a sled, and even then they're still wild animals. Like even though they're herded, but it's just really fun. I mean, half the time people come off the sled and fall into the snow, but no one's ever been hurt because it's like they don't go that fast. But it's just really, it's just a really fun. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually, reindeer sledding. It's and I can guarantee you can't do it anywhere else like we do with Nils. It's quite funny. Anyway.
So do you want to start showing us some images maybe so we can put that
Yeah,
a
sure.
bit clearer in our minds about what we're talking about here?
Okay. Now I've actually pulled up one. Let me share.
To the old share screen.
Yeah. Okay.
And have you ever been up in that part of the world, anywhere north?
I've been to Canada with my family for like maybe a week, and that's about it. Yeah, so not too much experience with the Arctic or.
Well, they do get 8-meter snow falls up there, mate.
Yeah. So we're in Banff, just being tourists for maybe eight or so days, and that's about my full extent of the north. But yeah, we'd love to get up there at some point for sure.
So the horses as well. That looks a lot like an Icelandic kind of horse, or it is, but
Yeah, it is. So I want to start with this one because this was the very first landscape image I took this was in Finland, and this was that summer trip I did in 2011.
the one on 2 weeks' notice.
No, that was sort of the recce I did for the tours, but that was 2014. So this was earlier. This was just when I was kind of exploring for the first time the region.
Gotcha.
So this is at midnight in Finland, northern Finland, in Inari. So I just went for a walk.
So what time of year, David?
This would have been late May.
May, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it's about when I'm going to be there. So
yeah. And I just, I was just obviously playing around with long exposures and just enjoying the fact that it was daylight at midnight. But so this is just more of a kind of a memory.
is it close to 24-hour daylight that time of year?
Yeah, it is 24-hour daylight. Well, I think the sun in late May, I think the sun still dips below the horizon, but it's like doesn't get any darker than this. So
Wow.
I'll skip to now. I've seen in terms of auroras. I've seen a lot of auroras now. I think well over 100.
Wow, that is a lot.
I don't tire of seeing auroras. I find them all very different, and I love when other people see them and I'm with them. and I love, you know, helping them photograph and stuff. But I don't photograph a lot anymore at auroras because I've just got so many photos. But I'll show you a few anyway.
Tough it out. Don't feel sorry for you, mate.
Oh, here
So,
we go. Here's the horse. The horse, yeah, they're Icelandic horses, but they use them in Sweden too. And they do trail rides in like -25, you know.
oh,
Crazy. But yeah, we just
Yeah, incredible creatures. Yeah.
just like the snout on this one and not the nose, sorry, not snout.
a beautiful shot, David.
Um,
So just in terms of those temperatures, because I don't think people, it'll probably come up in conversation anyway, but the kind of things that can happen in those sort of temperatures that us regular human beings don't have to deal with. Can you give us an example of the kind of things that can? I know, like if you touch your hand to metal at that sort of temperature, you basically stick to it, and if your breath comes up and you're wearing glasses that can just freeze instantly, then you can't see anything, and all these little quirks to actually managing yourself in those sort of temperatures. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll start with the -43.5. You can ask Jim Love about that.
Oh, that's right. He was there. I remember.
He actually burnt his nose on his camera.
Oh, no way.
So when it's that cold, everyone stops and the reindeer just lay down. Nobody does anything. The locals won't do anything either. That's really cold. We had the heaters on inside, the fire on, and the ovens on, and the doors open of the ovens. That's how cold it was, and we were still wearing our outdoor gear, and you know, our water bottles next to our beds froze overnight. It was that cold. But usually people will jump straight to the cameras and they'll worry about the cameras in the cold. But most cameras actually cope really well with cold, especially where we are. It's quite dry. So you're not really dealing with humidity and cold, which is not a good combination. The dry cold, it just affects battery life. Down to about -15, it doesn't really, you don't really notice it that much, or I don't. I can still get through a day on one battery. But below -15, down -20 or below, you start to cycle through batteries a bit. At -43.5, I did try and photograph the aurora because it did come out that night, and I got 3 shots per battery.
Wow.
3 shots.
And
Oh my God.
I could barely take it out because, you know, I just couldn't fumble with the, it was just hard. And so
Oh my God, 3.
and the LCD displays stopped working. All the displays stopped working, and the only way you can see the settings is looking through the viewfinder, and those numbers do tend to still illuminate. But everything.
Let's see Ben shaking his head.
Yeah.
That's ludicrous. Are you shooting with a DSLR or mirrorless?
That was a Pentax 645Z that day. So it was quite a large camera, and the bigger the camera,
The medium format digital.
the more it copes. But now I'm just shooting with the Nikon D850, and it just doesn't miss a beat.
I'm wondering how mirrorless would handle that kind of thing, because obviously smaller, the internals would be much more exposed to the cold, and then everything's electronic, so if the electronics die, you're stuffed.
Well, on the recent tour, there's a lot of mirrorless cameras. I still don't have one, but and it was just, they were just cycling through batteries a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But they still were. They were still working down to
Oh, that's a good sign. I was just thinking, should I start getting worried about my mirrorless camera and take it over?
No, the main thing to worry about, and it's not really a worry, is that if you're going to come inside with your camera gear, again, it seems to be below -15. You kind of should just bring your camera bag inside with the camera inside it, and just wait till it sort of warms up a bit in the room temperature before you open the bag. Otherwise condensation can form in the lens and stuff. But honestly, that doesn't really happen that often either. It's quite surprising, and I think it's just because the air is quite dry. But I think, you know, we're pretty blasé about that too. I mean, I just bring stuff inside, camera on a tripod, put it down, in 10 minutes it's fine. So it sort of cops a beating. But in terms of like your body, it's really all about your accessories. So, you know, I've got thermals and a really good Canada Goose jacket and pants. I find with that I don't need a lot of layers underneath usually, but it's all about the undergloves and mitts, not not gloves, definitely mitts, because you've got to keep your fingers together. Good boots, neck buff so that you can bring it up over your face. Balaclava if you need to. The fur hats, with the fur and they pretty much wear those as standard in Lapland, not just a beanie. We also use the hand warmers and foot warmers, the sachets that you can, and I've also got a pair of mitts that have got batteries in them.
No
And,
way. Wow.
Yeah, wow.
I found that particularly good. But just because I go so often, it was worth the investment. But
So David, you're talking about like not being able to wear gloves where their fingers are separated. Is that a temperature thing as well? They need to be closer to.
Yeah, the
Jeez, I wouldn't
locals.
thought of that.
I mean, if you watch what the locals do, no one's wearing like ski gloves. They all wear undergloves, like thin, wool undergloves, but they always go into big mitts. And the mitts are just often wool lined big leather mitts. Like they just look like oven mitts basically.
Oh, leather.
And the bigger the better. Like they don't really care about how stylish they are. But
How do you operate a camera with those though?
yeah.
Yeah, because it'd be the combined.
You've got to take the hand out and operate the camera, but you never touch the bare metal. But there's back to that day of minus 43.5, there's a few people who tell that story.
I remember Jim telling me about that, and I realized where the conversation came from because I bumped into Jim after that trip, and it was like, oh, what?
But we were walking outside, and your breath was just sticking in our eyelashes, and it would stick them together, and you've got to be really careful. But I got curious, and I wanted to know what happened when you went to the toilet outside. So did it freeze before it hit the ground? So I couldn't resist, and it did at minus 43.5. If you give it a bit of a wiggle, it I swear it wasn't hitting the ground as liquid. But
oh my god,
Jim's wife, I'm sure they won't mind telling this story
Liz,
on here. But I think it was probably the next night. It was still pretty cold, but it wasn't that cold. But it was damn cold. Only one of the two toilets was working at this place. We don't stay there anymore, but Jim's wife came back and said, she couldn't get into the other toilet either. The door was probably just sort of frozen shut a bit. And Jim was playing a trick on her and just said, oh no, the toilets are broken. And I don't think he expected her to take him seriously, but she just marched outside and squatted underneath a tree. Actually, no, I think it was the freezing night. Anyway, she came back in and said, oh, I went to the toilet anyway. And the local guide, who's this old Finnish guy, said he'd never seen in his whole life a woman squat under a tree at that temperature. So she was just tough as. I mean, she was, hats off.
His character.
Yeah, it was just the funniest thing. But so
so you should take us through some more images.
Before
or else we're going to run out of time.
Or rattle on about stuff. So some Aurora stuff. So some of these are this is Abisko. So this is like there's a chairlift that goes up the mountain, and they call it the Aurora Sky Station. And it just used to be a chairlift with a building at the top, but some smart cookie decided to call it the Aurora Sky Station and put a cafe up there. But this is one of the big nights up there we had. That's the moon. So it was so bright, I could shoot straight into the moon.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And it just was everywhere all night. And this was night 7 of this kind of Aurora. So it was just crazy.
Night 7.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know anyone in the world that I spoke to that's done a night 7.
No. If anyone's Aurora crazy, just come with us to Sweden, because there's always going to be a first group, but
we're pretty amped on Auroras down here in Tasmania, mate.
We've never had a group.
It's kind of an island, but we've got 175,000 people on the Aurora Australis Tasmania page. Like, people are keen as.
Yeah. So as you'll see the shape of the Aurora, so you'll notice in Tassie and like southern New Zealand, or and sometimes Victoria or South Australia, you tend to see it like on the horizon, and it tends to be quite pink or red a lot of the time. That's obviously because you're actually looking at an aurora that's quite a way away. There's several hundred kilometers up into the atmosphere, and the top part is often pink or red. So that's kind of what you're seeing. You're seeing the top part. The greens are when you're right underneath, generally right underneath the aurora oval, and that's where you get all the shapes. And generally we're looking straight up, and sometimes to the horizon like this.
Yeah.
So
is there a reason that you don't also see those kind of reds and pinks and yellows?
you do. Let me find one where you,
I guess you've got to visually see through a lot more layers.
yeah.
Yeah, you have to sort of think about it in 3 dimensions, and that you're just looking up at the bottom of it, and so all of the other parts obscured. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can see the side on, you're seeing that top of the red, but underneath it makes sense that all you're seeing is the green.
This is a good example. So this is like much higher. The pinks and the reds are much higher up. This is from January this year, as is that. There's some in that one. I'm sorry, these images actually aren't the highest resolution. I sort of pulled the web res, but I hope they're good enough.
Right.
Oh, they're great, man.
So
Do you have a go-to shutter speed, David? Just when you're like,
yeah. So mostly I try and most of the shutter speeds are around 2 to 5 seconds. I try and get the ISO to around 800. I don't like with the D850. I think it just gets a little bit too grainy for me for high ISOs. Like the mirrorless can probably handle a lot higher now, but I just like to I like to underexpose them as well, and then just kind of bring them up a bit. I'll show you actually. So yeah, mostly I try and keep it.
To our other viewers, that's basically because it's so damn bright. Like you probably wouldn't quite get away with those settings down here because you need to let more light in because the auroras themselves aren't as bright.
Yeah. That's near Abisko. Actually, Abisko also has quite interesting formations with sort of ice sculptures that form on the lake. So what happens is this lake, when it's still got open water, they get these storms come through, and they get quite big waves actually that come across, and they actually splosh up onto the shore and then create these ice sculptures. So it makes for really interesting sort of daytime photography of landscapes, but also foreground for, shots like this.
David, do you, I guess with it so bright, you don't need to, but like here in Tasmania, we'd probably have to design a trip on a new moon to limit the amount of light around.
Yeah.
It's up there. It's so bright, it's almost the opposite. You might enjoy having the moon to lighten up the landscapes, bring your foregrounds more into the conversation.
We used to avoid the full moon, and now we don't. We sort of time it so that we at least get a half moon into each departure, because it's actually really quite interesting on the landscapes, and usually the brightness of the moon isn't really a problem with the aurora. So that's a really good point. What else was I going to say?
Down here it's kind of our enemy. So beyond half moon anyway.
That's sort of looking straight up, like a coronal kind of aurora. I'm actually lying on my back there.
You're literally, you're looking at the middle, aren't you? You're right, the central part of the room.
And like shots like this are like more like maybe half a second.
Half a second.
So not, and this was.
And even in half a second, it looks like there's still a lot of movement.
Yeah, exactly. Because
they're that fast moving, yeah?
They're really moving quickly. They remind me, when they move that quickly, they really remind me of a cuttlefish, like the skirt of a cuttlefish, just sort of shimmering. Yeah. And I think that's one of the most surprising things about viewing the aurora right underneath the aurora oval is the amount of movement. So, and it can be hard to deal with. So I find it better to bring your shutter speed down. When it's really moving and bright, you can come down to quarter second, half a second, and even at 800 ISO, most cameras should pick it up pretty well.
What's your go-to lens and aperture for getting those really fast shutter speeds?
In January, I was using a 20mm prime on the Nikon 1.8, but
Yeah.
I actually had it on about 2.2 to 2.5 just to give it a little bit more depth with the foregrounds. And I found that was plenty fast enough.
Yeah.
Most people, even if they've got, 3.5, the Pentax was 4.5. And this is on the Pentax, and it's still fine. It's just that the auroras are so bright. Generally, I say, sometimes they're not, but most of the time, in a sort of an 8-day window, we'll get a couple of auroras which are pretty memorable. In terms
So I guess
of
you got a lot of, I mean, what sort of daylight time are you talking about here? You're pretty much, what,
yeah.
4 hours of daylight or something, or less, or?
No, so it starts getting light at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and by it just gradually gets lighter until from 8 till hang on, let me get this right.
This is in January, yeah?
Yeah, in January you get it's about 6 hours or 7 hours of light. But it's only from mid-January that the sun actually comes out. So by late January, we're starting to get a bit of sun, like an hour to an hour and a half a day. And it just comes up. So it looks like a sunset, sunrise.
Can't imagine
So
an hour of light a day. Oh,
and I think that's also what makes the landscape so beautiful in January. And that's why we do it in Sweden in January. It's cold, but we can deal with the cold. With the right amount of clothing and accessories, the cold, it isn't as much of a problem as you'd think. It's something to write home about. But
do you get people to bring their own equipment, or do you provide some of it, or?
We provide the expensive stuff like the Arctic suits and boots and mitts and hats. So, but people have got to have their own underclothes.
What do you wear on your feet, David?
I've got these big Kamek boots that I bought in Sweden, and then I've got wool underlay liners in those, and then another wool underlay, and then I put boot heaters in them as well. So
boot heaters, glove heaters,
yeah, it's pretty much
wool liners,
hands and feet. But we go through all that with people. There are also outdoor shops up in Lapland, so we generally make a couple of stops as well for foot warmers and hand warmers and things like that. We go in January because and a lot of these photos in Sweden anyway taken in January, because the light is like 6 hours of just beautiful twilight or sunrise type light, like really warm light, and then the blue hours really long. So I'll give you an example of so this kind of light. That will last for hours. So
jeez,
my dream.
that was shot at like, I don't know, 9:30.
Not 5 minutes. Oh,
Wow.
what was you saying? 5:30?
9:30
9:30.
in the morning. So, and you get these beautiful. The weather patterns are also very stable. So you get these long periods of hardly any wind, very crisp, and that's why the cold isn't so much of a problem a lot of the time, because there's often not really any wind.
Yeah.
So you're just dealing with dry cold. So when it's minus 25 and there's a dry cold, it's actually quite easy to keep warm with the right gear. And photography is also not really a problem. This is a good example of the ice formations on Lake Tornatrask. So these are actually trees that have been covered like a couple of days before with an Arctic storm blowing the waves up and over.
Wow.
And this is fresh water on these trees. Amazing spot. I just want to quickly show you, talking about exposure times. I know I'm all over the place, sorry about that. But I did actually try my hand at handheld aurora photos. And
Will Patino.
I didn't do too badly.
Well, Tina, eat your heart out.
This was in Norway actually. So this was in March, and this is a separate tour that I do with 50 degrees north. And I lent my tripod to a guest who brought the wrong tripod plate for her tripod.
Yeah.
And so I just decided to just handhold and see what would come out. So I got this one and this one, which I think is pretty damn sharp for a handheld. And oh, that one was resting on the snow. But it just gives you an idea of how bright the aurora is. But I probably wouldn't want to, the exposure time is about 1/4 of a second, I think, but I probably wouldn't want to go much longer anyway, because the movement is so high. So yeah.
How do people video it? I've seen some amazing videos of
Yeah.
it. Just sort of like,
Yeah.
geez.
We used to do that. We used to kind of do that with so if you put your camera on a tripod and shot every, like, did say a 2-second exposure with a 2-second break in between, we would just put the still images into just normal slideshow software. And what we did was, I can't remember the software I was using, but it works with any software. We set the duration to 0 and the transition to 2 seconds. So it was just constantly cycling through each frame. It was never resting on one frame, and it looked like a video. So
I don't think you do that. Yeah, right.
yeah, there's an
Yeah,
example.
like a
on my
time
web-
lapse. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of like time lapse, but it kind of works as like really slow film. It's kind of like, in a strange way, real time. But now, of course, you know, Peter, the guide in Sweden, he does a lot of filming now, and with the mirrorless, I can't remember which model he had, but I mean, he was getting some phenomenal.
There's Sonys as well that have a second base ISO at like 12,800 or something like that. So they'll be able to get like pretty damn good, like minimum shutter speeds for just actual like 1080p 4K video if they wanted, rather than having to rely on time lapse.
Yeah.
So
I was doing some filming recently with the A7S III and some 50mm 1.2s and things, and ISO 102,000, and you can film in basically, it's a night vision what we can do. So yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah, it's amazing. I need to pull my finger out and probably pull the trigger on mirrorless, I think. I did experiment with the black and white.
I really like that.
Because I thought
magnificent.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I just wanted to try something different. And for those of you who've read my bio, I also have a condition, I guess you'd call it. It's called synesthesia. And so what that is a sort of an unusual association of things with color. So, and this is sort of tied to this photograph. So for example, if you say to me the number 2, I don't think of the number 2, I think of a color. Same with the letters and clocks and days of the week and calendars and people, personalities. I'll assign them a color. So I often find color distracting. If the image is harmonious to me, it's fine. But if it's not, I actually would prefer black and white because it just strips the color away. And that's why I did this particular image, not because I thought it would be cool, but just because the green was starting to bug me, just because I'd seen so many auroras. And that sounds really, really stupid, but I just wanted to see what the shapes were doing and just take the color away. And then I did it once and I was satisfied, and I haven't needed to do it again. But I do like the structure and the movement, and it just sort of, there's a lot of, it reminds me of, you know, the Dancing Spirits kind of vibe. Each of the Sami cultures in the different regions have their own explanations for the aurora. Actually, I'll run through a few of those because they're quite interesting. But
David, I'm interested about the mythology and sort of cultural relationship with auroras up there. I imagine there's a lot of storytelling around that.
Yeah, a lot. So yeah, in Sweden they think it's to do with the spirits of your ancestors, and it's quite a lot of it seems to be about control of children. So they would tell the children to stay inside and not go outside, and not to whistle, not to point at it, and because the spirits would come down and take them away. But it seemed to be a good way to get the kids to go to sleep.
Gotcha.
And there was like there's also like a mythical creature called Starlo, and if you don't tidy up your stuff around the camp, in these days they were living in these big tents they call lavus, and if you don't tidy up and keep things clear, Starlo is this big dumb sort of monster with one eye, and Starlo will wander through the camp at night, and if it's not tidy, he'll trip over and then come and find you in your lavu and take you out and take you away. But if it's tidy, he'll walk straight through and not even notice you're there. So there's a lot of this mythology is about controlling children's behavior, in my opinion. But the Finns have a good explanation of a good story about the aurora. They believe it's the Arctic fox swishing its tail into deep snow and swishing up the snow that creates the sparkly sort of aurora. The Norwegians believe it's a school of herring, with the moonlight reflecting off the scales of the herring. And
what a mix.
yeah, the Inuit that are not part of Lapland, but the Inuit believe it's their ancestors playing football with the skull of a walrus. So,
Fantastic.
so yeah.
I guess with all those winter hours, I got a lot of time to think about it. Eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they didn't have TV or anything, probably, for the folklore stories. So yeah,
Can't fault the creativity. It's
This is all the reason why I keep going back there, because I learn new things every time, and it's just the depth of the culture is very surprising, but also just of the aurora, the storytelling, and the way that they articulated things in times when, of course, they had nothing to compare things to, just like the world over. I mean, but yeah, it's really fascinating. But
So do you want to show us maybe a little bit more about how
yeah,
you get around and the sledding and the reindeering and
yeah, sure.
that kind of thing? I saw some of the images there.
So this is dog sledding. This is Aaron. He's our local sort of dog sledding dude, and he's a big unit. This is a very cold day. So the dog sledding is the way that the Sami people would get around with reindeers and reindeer sledding. But I think these days they use snowmobile or dogs. Although dogs are now mainly for like tourist purposes, or racing. They actually race a lot of them. A lot of these teams do Iditarod and things like that. Of course, they actually quite like winter because the access is really good on the frozen rivers and lakes, and in summer they've just got to drive everywhere. So snowmobiling is, of course, a huge way of getting around.
How do the dogs go in the cold? Because they're a lot less rugged up than the people.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm constantly surprised. They're actually most of them are actually a breed of husky, but they're not the fluffy ones.
Right. Okay.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, it was the same in Norway and Finland. I'm always really surprised. They just look cold to me. Sometimes when it's really cold, they'll put these little shoes on them. But they tend to just curl up and they seem to be fine. I'll show you a shot of, God, I'm disorganized. I'm sorry about that. This is the way they sleep. And some of them just look like Australian Kelpies, honestly.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I was going to say.
They love to run. They really love to run.
Yeah.
And they eat a heck of a lot. And they're super happy. And of course, they sleep in kennels at night on straw and stuff like that. So they're very, 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 very well looked after. This is Aaron. There's about -25, I think, when it starts to.
What's the fur and the hats largely made of?
On my jacket, it's made of coyote because it's Canadian. But a lot of these might be fox, but not endangered fox, or they make a lot of their hats out of fox, or oh god, it's on the tip of my tongue.
So they just have better insulating qualities than like multiple layers on beanies and that kind of thing. They just almost like the air as much as anything else. Like
they create, like the fur creates this sort of microclimate around the face, which tends to keep it warmer, and it does actually work if you try it out. Except of course when you're banging along on a dog sled, because it's actually quite fast at times.
So is it helpful to have a beard or not? If it
is
freezes on there.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely. I do tend to grow mine when I'm there. I don't shave, and I do find it helpful. But for some reason, the face and nose isn't as much of a problem as fingers and toes.
Right.
Yeah, I find that the face can tolerate quite a bit, even in the extreme cold, except when it's really windy. Okay, so this is this, I don't know actually how to pronounce it. I've tried a few times, but it's phonetically it's Rensjon, Rensjon, but there's a couple of accents on the letters, and when you ask a Swede to pronounce it, it's completely different. But let's call it Rensjon. Rensjon's one of the coldest places in Sweden, and this was -26. I remember this day specifically, because there was this beautiful hoarfrost everywhere, and this is a traditional Sami herding family, and he's actually rounding them up to
just admiring the quality of the composition there. Like, it's just such a nice shot. There's so much great balance, like separation of those reindeers from the edge of the frame. You've got the person in the middle and the tree. Like, it's just a great black and white photo.
I think I might have judged it. Was that one of the released part of the series anyway in the AOP?
Yeah. This wasn't part of the winning series. This was a different year, but this was it was in APA, and it did well. And
yeah, I remember judging some of them.
I was in a bit of a black and white phase at this time, which I do from time to time.
I remember that the tonality that you used in black and white was really quite striking and just so perfectly handled.
Oh, thanks everyone. I do really. So I started out, just to jump back really quickly. I actually started out in photography, shooting weddings, and this was because I grew up in Sydney, and when I was at university, I was a barman, and I worked at this place.
Me too.
And we did a lot of weddings, like it was a function, basically functions, and I worked at 1,500 weddings.
Oh, wow.
In like a 6-7 year period.
Yeah.
And so of course I befriended a lot of the wedding photographers that came through, and then eventually I was getting interested in photography, and I'd go out and shoot like landscapes in the Blue Mountains and stuff. But they convinced me to actually work for them, just starting out. So I think I shot about 5 weddings, all on film, back in the day, and I thought I was going to die. Like, I was so stressed, and it was just
I remember shooting weddings on film too, mate. It's not for the faint-hearted
at all. Not for me. So anyway, but I remember also when I was a student, when I was at school, I also wanted to be a journalist originally, and I didn't sort of follow that. But I think I kind of came around full circle, because I shot landscapes for so long, and then specifically panoramas, which is why I started the Pano Awards, and that was on film. So I was shooting the big 6 by 17 centimeter frames, but sort of I still love panos, but I'm getting sort of more and more into the travel documentary style and black and white. I don't use a tripod a lot anymore. So even with the landscapes that I'll show you, a lot of them are not. I don't use a tripod, just because of the style, and I work a lot more quickly. And it's more sort of opportunistic rather than sort of created setup. So this is probably a good example. It's a bit of a crossover between landscape and travel documentary.
Yeah.
I want to show the way that they're living in and the situation, but I'm also trying to arrange it in a particular way, sort of drawing on the landscape style of composition.
Mm.
So this is all handheld. I'll try and find some other examples of that.
Yeah, I'd love to see more of that style of photos. I find myself really drawn to that as well. Like, even though, you know, my kind of own work typically is like fine art landscape, the more weddings and stuff like that, I find myself really drawn to this documentary style. And there's a guy down in Tassie called Nick Green who does it really, really well, kind of surf focused. And so, I was just really enjoying that shot. So I'd love to see some more.
I think what it is about.
Yeah, so we definitely want to get a bit more, get a few more images so you won't get left.
Yeah, what's the time?
Left out in the cold on that, David.
Yeah.
Yes, I think what it is about this style of photography that I like is that it's going back to the decisive moment of photography rather than too much pre-visualization, which is what you can easily get into with landscape photography. So these are some portraits that I took of the Sami reindeer herders. Now, these young guys, they are Sami, they have to be. You're not allowed to own or handle reindeer without being Sami. And these guys are like, they say very little, but they make for really good subjects because they don't pose at all, which is kind of what you want. This guy's name's Rasmus. This is Axel. That's as animated as they get. We stayed in Rasmus's guiding cabin for a couple of nights, and you had a bass guitar and bottles of whiskey and a foam mattress with a leak in the roof. That's Rasmus. And it's kind of the culture. Here's the two of them. This gives you an idea of the light that you can get at this time of year.
Yeah.
So this is like 11:30 in the morning.
Wow.
And this is just when the sun's just starting to rise again. But
the far cry from Sydney.
Yeah, exactly. And so just this kind of scene, you know, they still live this way. They still herd reindeer, not just for tourists. They still use the antlers. They still, you know, sell the meat, although not the sledding reindeer. They don't eat those. Here's one we managed to get a reindeer to look fairly still in front of the aurora. You know, still enough.
Wait, what do they call those? It looks like a sort of Native American Indian teepee into the design and shape, but is it?
They called it a labu, and it's their traditional as well. That's their traditional shelter. And it's got a fireplace in the center, and then it's got very designated areas for different members of the family, a kitchen area, and then a whole lot of rules about what happens if you're not allowed to throw anything into the fire, for example, otherwise the spirits will do bad things to you. You're not allowed to poke the fire with a stick because another spirit will come and grab you and take you away, things like that. There's a lot of respect that has to go on. You're not allowed to
you have to be very careful, I guess, because fire could take everything from you if you're not careful.
Yeah. If you come to the entrance of a lavu, you're only allowed to step in and sit down if the host offers you coffee. If you don't get offered coffee, you're not meant to. That's the sign that you should just go away.
Yeah, wow.
As you may know, the Finns and the Swedes are very big on coffee, even though it's not obviously a native sort of commodity.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
It's been around for a while, and it got to the point where it was like gold. They would hoard it and trade it like gold.
Yeah, right.
They would get a ration of like, I want to say like a pound each a year, and so they would brew it and then re-brew it and then reuse it, but they drink a lot of coffee, and it's black and strong, like knock your socks off kind of coffee. The Finns probably more so. They're really into coffee
and alcohol.
What's that one directly between those two photos with the tree?
Yeah, I was on that.
That's incredible.
Okay.
Goodness.
So I was going to get onto these in a tick, but that's fine. I'll get on.
You follow your flow, David.
This was part, no, it's fine. This was part of, so you might have noticed that with a lot of the style of images, I shoot a lot of handheld. You know, I came from a film background. I don't spend a lot of time editing images generally, but my portfolio for Landscape Photographer of the Year in 2015 was images like this, which were all they were all composite images. So I decided I was going through a phase, and I decided to kind of put together these kind of Lapland.
They were pretty convincing, mate. I don't think many people picked it.
Well, yeah, and that was the idea. So the idea was to not make them kind of a dreamscape kind of landscape, but just to keep the compositions quite simple and to keep the composite elements quite simple. So
very believable.
This is probably the most complex one, actually, because the base image is all there, like the trees and everything. There's nothing really, you know, dodgy about that, except that down here it's in a graveyard. So there's actually gravestones that were all around here. And then the reindeer was photographed on the day before and put into the image. Which was obviously within the rules of the competition. Nothing you know, untoward about that. But I'll show you the other three images of the folio. Okay, this this was the one that won the.
This was high scoring print, yeah.
This is high scoring print.
Yeah, I remember that day.
So the reindeer is obviously here. That has been. I entered this landscape into the state awards and got feedback, and then decided to do a composite image where I added the reindeer, but then I also added this reindeer over here.
I didn't even see that.
That's and nobody
Easter egg.
Nobody saw it for ages, and when they did, they went off like a
they went off the trolley. But
went off the
and
trolley.
that was the idea. It was meant to be something hidden and, you know, a bit exciting. But this day was magic. I mean, shooting this day, the actual base images, was one of the best shooting days of my life. I was just rolling around in the snow and shooting on my stomach, and just like I was really in the flow. And actually, that's a really good segue to talking a little bit about Paul, about the stuff I'm doing with the nonprofit in America. Yeah, I'll come to that in a minute, but that's a good segue to that. So I was definitely, time sort of stood still, and that was a day that, yeah, I'll just always remember. So there's that one. I think it's at the top, actually. This one.
Yeah.
Now this one's pretty straight. There's not a lot I've done to this one except add these footprints down here, which were another photograph. Obviously, I haven't sort of created the footprints. I've photographed footprints and just brushed them in. But other than that, this is just a beautiful, very still, you know, scene that we get around Abisko, where the snow just really piles up thick on these tiny, tiny branches.
What is that symbol representing, David? Is it? I mean, you'd see that at like a railway crossing here, but I don't. It's not.
Yeah, this is it's just a trail marker.
Just a trail marker.
Yeah, they had them, so they stand out, so they're bright red.
It's a testament to how much snow there is that the bright part's that high up.
Yeah. The
trail marker. It's like, oh my God, how much snow do you get?
Yeah, exactly. And the last image in the series is this one. Yeah. Now, the trail marker and this one and the one with the hidden reindeer were all shot within 200 meters of each other on the same day.
Wow.
And so they were just sort of a natural series. And I think in the end, it was also the print quality that sort of got them elevated.
Oh yeah, they were superb. Did you print it yourself or something?
Yeah, so I did print it myself. Epson has been a supporter of mine since before the Panel Awards. So, and that's how that came about. So they've supported me personally since 2007. And Bruce Williams at Epson cringes when I tell this story, but I was having a bit of trouble with the printing profiles. And
Yeah.
so I just set the settings to printer managers profiles.
Oh, really?
Just click print, and they just all turned out perfectly. And I thought that would be like, I thought Epson would love that story, but apparently they don't.
I was going to say that's not what you're meant to be doing. So
no,
that's
I
interesting.
know.
What sort of paper do you tend to go for? Like, or at least what did you go for with this?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paper's a massive.
With the black and whites, I generally use the Canson edition etching rag, and then with color photos, I'll use the Epson Premium Luster, or if people sort of order the big color glossy ones, then I use the Fujiflex. Yeah. So, but I think I just really like the rag, the black and white.
I've recently moved from the Hahnemühle to the Canson Rag Photographique, and it's a beautiful paper.
Yeah.
It's just so nice. Feels so fine art. So it looks like they would have come out really nicely on something like that.
Yeah, and these are the ones on my wall.
Etching rag is a little bit more textured, yeah?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, but it's still very detailed. So,
yeah, I remember spending quite a lot of time with my nose up to these prints, mate, and the print quality was impeccable, my friend.
Yeah, I think it was the pinnacle of my award career. But I haven't focused too much on, I mean, since the AIPP's been gone, I've sort of...
Well, you've been more busy running them.
Well, yeah, and that's a big job.
Yeah, that's probably a show into itself. In fact, it kind of was a show. I remember we got Peter on, but we couldn't get you. And we were
yes,
talking about
yes, that's right. That was the landscape photographer of the year. Yeah. So
might be nice to do it on the Pano Awards sometime.
Pano Awards is into its 14th year, and
well done, David. Well done, mate.
Landscape photographer of the years, I think we're just coming into the 10th year, I think. But yeah, they two of the most satisfying things I've done. And I think it's just the creation from scratch of something that's turned into what they have. And the amount of it, when people talk about exposure in photography, and how sort of meaningless it often is with, being convinced to give away images for free or whatever, but the exposure that we get with those two competitions is just, it's just incredible. Publications like the Atlantic and Huffington Post and, NBC and yeah, just the amount of meaningful
publications.
Yeah, and the elevation of the genre and of the photographers, and very
I'm still getting matches from one photograph of the year in 2015. I still get matches on some of the services I used. This is, is this all right? And I was like, oh no, it wasn't a competition. It's okay.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, so that's but a lot bigger and a lot more work than anyone could ever imagine, I think. So one of my goals now is to get back to more of my own photography as well, and try and strike that balance, because it's easy to get stuck in, running an event like the Pano Awards. It's fairly consuming for quite a lot of the year. So, but going to Lapland is also an opportunity for me to be a bit more immersed in the landscapes myself. So I might just scroll, before I quickly talk about the work, the non-profit work, I'll just quickly scroll through more photos, because I know I haven't been to.
Yes, please.
So I'll just start at the top and I'll just go down. So this was just an experiment into, dragging the shutter top to bottom on some beautiful standard trees in Abisko, that I just really liked the light that was hitting them. And I was just interested in an abstract kind of presentation. It's just straight out of camera with a bit of, out of camera, but then with a bit of contrast adjustment.
Contrast, I was going to say, yeah.
But I haven't cleaned. I sort of wanted to clean up this area, but I thought, no, I'll just leave it, because I just like the natural kind of vibe of it. So from these composites that I shot, I really haven't done that sort of thing again. I'm sort of back to my back to my old, roots. And I even bought another film camera. I bought another panoramic Fuji camera, but then Qantas managed to smash it for me. So
Oh no.
yeah, so I've gone back to just digital, but more sort of the documentary and travel style. This is another Aurora, but Peter, the local guide, set up his tent and put a candle in it. So just the candlelight is enough to, make it really, really bright.
Jeez, must have a pretty good sleeping bag, mate.
Yeah, this is from the recent tour in, this is in Norway, northern Norway. We're just shooting near a fjord and, just on the class.
Like leaves, aren't they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, sort of like this little sort of barbecue hut next to a jetty, and just these crystals forming on the window, really, really close to the Russian border here.
Oh, is that a window? Is it?
Yeah, it's a window. Yeah,
Oh, I thought it was like the surface of a lake or something. Yeah, right.
No.
Wow. Jeez,
Yeah.
what stunning shapes.
Some more dog sledding. You see that they're just so happy when they run.
Yeah.
Born to run.
Super stoked, and yeah, they'll run for ages. One of the mushers actually is really interesting. She does Iditarod, and listening to her talk about going the distance in -50 Celsius.
Oh,
Yeah, and just sleeping with the dogs on straw and stuff like that. It's just incredible.
oh,
Absolutely incredible.
oh.
And one of the other mushers, another female, so that's a female. One of the other mushers has just come to work in Sweden after walking the length of New Zealand, through the mountains, like all through the
Jeez.
mountain ranges, top to bottom. Yeah. So
I got a friend that's done the South Island, but not the whole
Yeah,
two
wow.
islands.
Just they tend to be incredibly adventurous, these mushers, and it's something, there's this thread that runs through them, because I've met quite a number of them now, and they're all very similar. They've all just got that drive in them, just much like the dogs, actually. These are some of the ice formations that form on the lake in Abisko, just from the moving water, the splashing water. Some of the trees on the lakeside, that it's kind of like a very Japanese vibe in many ways up there, because the birch trees, when they're bare, they just get this very kind of, I don't know, there's a reverence about them which is really, really interesting, and not necessarily in a sort of a chocolate box kind of way. They're all just really interesting, with ice formations or frost or snow or different ways, but also the colors that appear in the sky, and the warm reflected light that sometimes comes on the different subjects. Quite interesting. This is the Ice Hotel. So in Sweden, there's like heaps of ice hotels now around the world, but the Swedish one's the original. And they have a section which is all year round. It's like in a building, which solar panels on the roof and so on. But this is the bit that they build each year, and it's massive. Like, it's quite enormous, and you can stay in it. And we visit there every year too, because it's actually really tasteful. They actually really do a good job. They invite artists from around the world to come and create individual suites, the rooms, and they teach them how to carve ice, and you can apply and recommend that anyone do that if they're interested in spending a couple of weeks on the house and in Sweden, creating your own ice room. But yeah, it's actually a really fascinating place. I've stayed there once, and once is enough, but it was pretty interesting. It's it's definitely worth a visit, which is why we still go there. The light in January is a bit like this. So this is kind of the peak of the light during the day. This is kind of, this would have been, I don't know, around the 10th of January this year. This was on one of the dog sledding expeditions, and this is the kind of scenery that we sort of pass through a lot. So it's just incredibly beautiful, and unexpected, I think, for people who are used to seeing the tourist pictures of Norway, you know, Lofoten, and I find that you know, having traveled a lot in Norway as well, and we actually visit Norway on this tour too for a day, just to get the fjords out of everyone's system. But I find that there's more sort of range in Sweden of landscapes. It's more of a gentle landscape because it's, you know, it's fairly undulating and so on. But you do. It's just there's a bit more nuance to it, I have to say. And I would say that because I'm quite attached to Sweden, so I come with a certain bias, but just comparing and contrasting the different Nordic countries, even though Finland's technically not part of Scandinavia, but it is a Nordic country. I think that they each have certain charms, but Norway is kind of like a cathedral with a big grand organ, and Sweden's like kind of like more like a gentle, I don't know, harp or something. And
Interesting analogy.
yeah, Finland's more like a drunken guitar.
A landscape described as a drunken guitar.
This is kind of a typical, you know, this is a scene on the side of the road in Sweden.
Wow.
Just that beautiful, crisp separation, and this is something that I take a shot like this, just handheld, and you know, I'm buzzing for hours because I you know, it's not, I don't know, it just means a lot to me, and it's just kind of, you know, not unusual in Sweden. This is the entrance to a church. It's like a 400-year-old church, a timber church.
Wow.
In Kiruna.
Say, it looks
Sorry,
timber.
near the ice hotel, not in Kiruna. A place called Jukkasjärvi, and it's like a very old village. And the church is behind it. You can't quite see it, but inside the church, there's a lot of painted wood carvings, actually. And I have a theory, because when you walk into this church, it really reminds you of a Mambo like artwork. Mambo, like, and I reckon Reg Mombassa visited here about 30 years ago and got inspired, because the whole thing just looks like Mambo to me.
That looks like that might be the graveyard you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right in behind the church. That's right. This is Norway, and this is actually in May on that trip in 2011. So in the northern part of Norway and Lapland, you still get that sort of snow coverage, and but this is, you know, after 11 at night from memory. So you get this beautiful light, and that's from a ship. Another scene of
Beautiful.
How
long is that exposure, David?
That looks silky.
I want to say about 5 or 6 seconds. That's on the Pentax 645Z.
Nice.
So that was a while ago. That's not a new photo. But yeah, I just wanted a very minimalistic sort of photo, and I really wanted to show this icy edge, you know, the way that the water just sort of undercuts, which is fairly typical. This is a outdoor dunny in Sweden, and that's the -26 day. And interestingly, they make the seats out of polystyrene, so they don't make you sit on a cold timber or porcelain, or you know.
Wow, you've got some serious issues with the surfaces if you try and sit on.
But they're just long drops too. They're not like, you know, or just a bucket. Let me scroll down.
How would you describe the personality of reindeer?
They're kind of yeah, it's a really good question. They're kind of like cows. They're docile, and then when you want to make them go, I think they really rely on adrenaline and testosterone to make them really go. All of the sledding reindeer are male, but they're all castrated males. But I don't know, they're pretty gentle animals. They'd never really hurt you. Just inadvertently, if you get too close to their antlers, you can cop one in the face, but they don't mean to do it. They're pretty food obsessed. They have to forage. They're up in the mountains in summer, which is why they do the herding. So in summer, they herd them up to the mountains, especially around Norway, because they can't stand the mosquitoes. There's a lot of mosquitoes down on the flat, and they want to be up in the mountains. But in winter, they herd them down into the forests, and they forage under the snow for the lichens.
Wow.
And the moss, and they eat the bearded moss on the trees. And so they have to eat so much to, when they're growing their antlers, it's like, I want to say it's like 1 or 2 centimeters a day. It's something like that they grow. And imagine how much they need to eat to be producing that and keep their body fat and everything. So I can see why they're pretty food obsessed sort of creatures. A lot of other people don't like this shot, but I do, because it's a very real scene in a working reindeer family. And it just really shows, the sort of the harshness of the environment, really. Pretty much every surface is just covered in frost and cold, and they've harnessed this reindeer up and it's run away, and it's trying to get it back again. It's dragging the rope along, and I don't know. This one speaks to me personally from my experience. Here's this 3 reindeer again. I really wanted to position this in a big empty void because I liked the gradient of the grey and the faint line of trees just made them really sort of pop.
Yeah.
But
Good use of negative space. It's nice.
Here's a close-up of reindeer eye. Just more serene moment. Oh, this is so this is the traditional sort of herder's lunch. So what it is cut and salted reindeer meat, like in strips, that they sort of reheat in the pan, and then they'll eat it in like flatbread rolled up, like a kebab, or gyros.
Flatbread, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and they'll pretty much they'll eat this a lot still, and it's pretty delicious. But it sort of struck me. I noticed that in Scandinavia in general, but especially up north, like I'm gluten intolerant, and my whole family is, like everybody, and it's really to do with the genetics. So if you go to McDonald's in anywhere in Scandinavia, you can get a gluten-free Big Mac because they've got a separate kitchen.
Yeah.
Because such a high proportion of the population is gluten intolerant. And in Finland and Russia, they're also lactose intolerant, a lot of them. And the reason, of course, is that they didn't grow wheat, hundreds of thousands of years ago. There's no such thing. So it was traded in by the Vikings and other methods. And it's a relatively recent thing. So they're not equipped for it. So, of course, my question is, why are you eating reindeer meat in flatbread? Because bread, what did you eat before there was wheat? And the answer is that they used to crush up the bark of the birch tree into a powder and mix it with salt and water. And they used to make flatbread out of birch trees, which I just find the most fascinating thing. The little stories like that, little facts like that, just make this region extremely fascinating. This is an older herder in his modern jacket.
With the similar austere persona.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the dogs in full flight.
Oh, good shot.
Really, really pulling hard to get us, off at the start.
They don't look like big dogs for
No,
the power that they must have to do what they're doing.
they don't, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to get used to that. That they just look skinny and like like cattle dogs. But yeah, they seem to be okay and happy. This is the sort of minimalist landscapes that I really
Beautiful.
like.
Love that.
Beautiful.
And I really am quite enjoying shooting wider apertures these days, instead of stopping it down all the time. So I think this is probably shot at about, I want to say about 3.5, something like that.
Works really nicely here. Like it's just softening that up. Like, yeah.
Keep that separation there. Yeah.
And it also tells a story about the birch trees. So they take a long time to grow in this environment, but they also break really easily during storms. So they're just this constant cycle of, you know, after every sort of bad weather event, you can go around and see all the trees that have fallen down almost, and yet they tell me that they take, you know, decades or even longer to grow. So I actually haven't figured that out in my head yet either, this rejuvenation cycle. And these things, I realize that when I pose questions like that to myself, that I'm really getting lost in where I am, and really getting lost in a good way in the environment. And so I like small questions like that because they remind me of, you know, just being observant. This is a very typical sort of, you know, snowy treescape in that plant. This is actually in the center of Kiruna. So this is a park, and this is actually a composite image. So that person, there was a person there, but I didn't like the look of them. So I waited and
They got the flick.
I waited and photographed another person. So I did go back to my composite for a little tiny bit. This was a beautiful morning. This is in Abisko, just behind where we stay, and
Oh, magnificent quality of light there, mate. It really is.
I've been eyeing off this little hut for a long time, just because of the blue door, years, and I just thought the conditions were right to try and photograph it.
Oh,
That soft kind of front light is always so nice.
Yeah,
Very jealous that you can get that for having that for hours. Just seems like such a luxury. It's like 5 minutes if you're in anywhere besides that sort of
yeah.
north or south. So yeah, that's awesome.
You can see Lake Tornatrask in the background. So this is where we stay on the lake there. Background there. Here's another shot with just dragging the shutter. I really like this kind of example of the forests in Sweden, but I just thought I'd try something different again.
well, I think something quite unique about this one. It's sort of like there's a lot of separation and spatial depth in the bottom, and then it just merges into this singular, like blocky plane at the top somehow that I find really intriguing.
What I'm really getting drawn to are the textures in it. It almost looks like a double exposure in some areas. I assume you've left it in place for a tiny bit before dragging the shutter, and it's just kind of left enough of an imprint of those sharp textures to kind of have a dual sort of impression in the photo, which it's really, really cool.
Yeah, and you're spot on, but I didn't intend to do it. So it was just because it was so cold and my hands were so cold that I think I delayed. I didn't, at the time, I thought I'd timed it badly and I hadn't started it, but I think that was the serendipitous thing that created the unique, it wasn't what I expected. So that's what did it. Just
that'd be
holding it in place for a little bit too long before I started movement actually turned out to be, what made the shot, I think. But,
and it's sort of, it's a monotone image, but at the same time, you've got this separation of color in between that just adds all this depth to it. It's really, I can feel my excited judging hat come on. This is one of my favorite ones I've seen of yours, David, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of my favorites too. It's my profile picture on my website, on my Facebook page.
Superb.
This one did well at APA, actually. This was a gold.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, I think you were. Yeah, I think you might have been on that panel.
Yeah, I think I was.
I've got a meter by meter print of this on my own wall, and there's not many of my own photos on my wall except for the ones behind me, which were the winning folio. But this one is one of my favorites. This probably isn't the best example in terms of file size. That's probably not quite sharp, but it's a super, super sharp image. And when it's printed on the Canson,
Really crisp.
it's really, yeah, it's just amazing. It's,
Crisp and delicate. It's
yeah. Really love this one. And I think one of the judges said, when it was at APRA, said it was like a family of trees. And that's, and I hadn't thought of it that way, but it sort of is. So there's two kids at the background sort of peeking around dad, you know, like, and it, yeah, it really gives it that personality. And then there's a little person over here, which was, you know, just a little bit, have a bit of scale.
Is there any composite work in that shot, or is that all straight out?
No, that's straight.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, this is just a typical working shot. Well, he was working to try and get the sled for us to sit in, but you know, I just really like the sort of dynamic sort of storytelling in this.
Oh, there's the big mitts.
Yeah, they're big sort of wool mitts, but the ones we have are even bigger. But they've got their reindeer skin boots on. Some of them have mitts that are made of seal skin, actually, and they're the warmest ones. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're from Norway. This is Norway. This is in May, just from a ship looking across to a range. I can't remember which range, but I just really liked the gradient. It's almost like you're going up into outer space with the inky darkness. And this is the sort of thing in Norway that you get on the coast. You know, the sort of light and yeah, there's a little bird here, which just made my day.
Oh yeah.
Just the way the clouds curl around. I just love the shape.
I wasn't sure if it was a spot on my screen. Yeah,
a little bird. There's some of the icicles we get. It's just insane.
That's long.
Yeah.
Be a great macro photography subject. Have you ever kind of pulled that out, or?
Not seriously, but I do often do sort of, you know, general close-ups, but not massively macro. But
yeah, if you're traveling that far and you're looking at your kit and what you're going to bring, that wouldn't be the first one, but it would.
Exactly. Exactly. Some more sledding through some very
Beautiful.
Yeah,
that gives a great sense of being there.
Yeah, I say tell.
Oh wow.
Yeah, stunning.
This
is in the chapel, which is this particular year.
Wow.
They're really amazing. Like they really go all out. There's nothing kitsch about it. They're very dedicated to their craft, and yeah, it's a really quite a fascinating place. These are some of the lakeside formations that we get. Oh, here's a good one.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
The scale with the figure there.
Particularly good this year, that particular year.
Such beautiful blue tones in there. Like it's just, just really gives the cool feeling so well.
Those blues are amazing. And you can see how untouched it is. I mean, this is the good thing about Sweden, the traffic. These places we go to, there's not really anyone else there except fishermen. So there's not like there's a stream of people going to.
David, you've got some spots free on next year's one, I believe.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, Paul. Yes. Yeah. We've got so the first group's fully booked, but we've got the second departure now, which is available. And in preparation for this talk tonight, I have actually created a discount for your viewers of $500 off the tour, which expires on Friday. So it's just on the website. You don't need a code or anything.
And the website is
davidevansphotographer.com.
Yeah.
And that's for the Swedish Lapland tour. So yeah, until Friday, it's $500 discount, which is
Oof.
awesome.
Tempting, mate. Tempting.
Yeah, so we've got 2 departures, but the first one's fully booked, and we're on.
What's the date for the second one, David?
Good question. I think it's the 17th till the 25th of January.
Yeah.
But just check that on the website. But you're pretty sure it's the
Oh,
17th.
right. My birthday's right in the middle there, mate.
But yeah, I mean, we've been running it for nearly 10 years, and Peter Rosen is the guide I do it with. And as I said, he lives there for a lot of the time. He's got 2 houses, so he goes between, but and he's the local guru, and he's just so incredibly passionate about photography, but also about the area and about the Sami culture, and the experiences and supplies that we use are just, I mean, we do things and we go places that you can't do and you can't get to normally. So incredibly proud of the tour and what we do. And we kind of, every year we try and refine it and make it, a bit better and a bit whatever we can think of, whatever feedback we get. So I can't recommend it highly enough. It's just incredibly beautiful. It's not just the aurora, although many people come to focus on the aurora. Peter's the author of multitudes of books on the aurora, and he gets people stopping him, Chinese tourists stopping him at the Sky Station to sign his book and all sorts of stuff. But honestly, it's actually, as you've seen with some of the photos tonight, it's actually a lot about culture, the reindeer culture and the landscapes, and it's I don't know how long I'm going to be doing the tour, but I'm certainly not about to stop. It's brilliant.
We've had Anne in the comments ask, would we have to sleep with the dogs on your trips?
No, definitely not. So we stay at 2 different places. We stay in cabins on a frozen river, in sort of this beautiful snowy forest. All the cabins are heated, and there's a sauna, and and the other place we stay at is in Abisko, which is like a hotel. With a restaurant, and
not curling up in the kennels.
No, definitely not. No, we're definitely in the first world in terms of the, what we provide. But no. But what was I going to say? I can't remember. It's pretty magic. So basically, to get there, that's right. To get there, it's also pretty easy. You basically fly to Stockholm, and then, as I said, Kiruna is a mining center, but it's an underground mine. But it means that it's well serviced by flights. So it's a 90-minute flight from Stockholm to Kiruna in a large plane, and so it's easy to get to as well, which makes it not too expensive to kind of get there and back from Australia, which was important. But as I said, once we're 10 minutes out of Kiruna, we're in the middle of the wilderness. So it's really brilliant. Phone coverage all the way. You can Instagram your heart out. It's really wonderful. This photo, by the way, that's Lake Tornatrast down the bottom. And this was one of the really spectacular nights we had.
I reckon.
But in terms of aurora, if there's any aurora nuts, then it's definitely the right tour for you. We're out most nights when the weather's permissible, and if any of you are listening and know Peter, the local guide, he will not rest until you've seen the aurora, and then once you've seen it, he won't rest until you've seen it again.
The aurora whisperer.
We've driven, there are times when he's just said, right, we need to fight for it. I remember one day we'd driven over into Norway for the day. We drove back to Abisko and we had dinner, and Peter said, right, it's cloudy here, but it's clear to the west. So we just started driving. Peter just kept driving and I kept following because we've got 2 cars, so a van and a car. And he just kept driving and driving and driving. We drove all the way back into Norway. and ended up at a fjord, and there was nothing, and it was freezing and it was windy. And then we were all getting back into the cars, and he was the only one still standing looking at the sky. And all of a sudden he said, "Get out of the car." And we all got out of the car, and it was one of the biggest auroras I've ever seen.
Oh, what a great story.
Just has that sixth sense, and he's never, I mean, I say he's never been wrong. He has, obviously, sometimes we go out and we don't see anything, but as Peter says, you've got 100% chance of not seeing an aurora if you're in the bar.
Yeah.
So, you know, if the weather is good, we generally, you know, we'll be hunting the aurora. If we know the weather's not so good, we'll relax in the bar. But Peter's just the right guide to do this tour with, and Peter and I become, you know, lifelong friends with most people who come on the tour. So it's wonderful.
I bet. David, we've kind of hit the natural time frame of the show, but I'm also conscious that we haven't had a chance to speak about what you wanted to speak about earlier in terms of the foundation work you're doing. I don't know if you could sum that up for us, but it does sound like something very special to you, and
it is.
I didn't want to leave without you giving the opportunity to at least tell us a little bit about it.
I won't take long. So yeah, as you mentioned at the start, I do a few things. You know, I'm a photographer.
Professional wine tasting.
Yeah, I do. I'm a wine taster with the Australian Wine Research Institute. So just quickly, that's I'm on the sensory panel. So our job is to taste and describe wines for research purposes and also for commercial clients in Australia and other countries. And we also do smoke taint assessment. So if a vineyard thinks that their wine or their vineyard has been affected by smoke or bushfire or so on, they'll send it to us, and that's my favorite thing, because I think that's what I'm best at in terms of the smelling and tasting. But that's because I've been working in the wine industry for many, many years, probably 15 years as a photographer. So a lot of the commercial work I do is focused on the wine industry. And years ago, I used to publish the Australian Wine Calendar. 2006, I think that started. So that's a bit of a passion. And obviously the landscape photography and the competitions, but also I am on the board of a nonprofit in Philadelphia in America. And it's called Seeing Happy. And what it is it's an app basically that's designed for sharing photography for the purposes of, with a focus on positive psychology. So it's like Facebook, but you can't troll people. You're just sharing. And it's run by a good friend of mine, Mandy Seligman. And Mandy's husband is Dr. Martin Seligman, who's one of the most famous, well-known psychologists in the world. He was the one who sort of almost coined, you know, the phrase flow. So this is tying back into talking before about when you develop flow in something. Martin is one of the pioneers of talking about, well, not only flow, but resilience and grit. And, you know, he wrote a book called The Optimistic Child, for example, talking about optimism and things related to that with children. He's also worked with the US Army developing their PTSD program, and his wife Mandy is also a psychologist who spent many years homeschooling their 5 children. I got to know Mandy many years ago, and so now work with her and others in Philadelphia and New York. And we're basically trying to develop this app, and also things like a school curriculum for the purposes of tying photography into things like optimism in children and creativity. in children, and I'm probably not articulating myself very well, but it's a really, really good cause that it's free to get involved in too. It's just called seeinghappy.org, and there's an
Oh yeah, I was just looking up the app just then.
yeah, there's an app as well, and we're sort of just gradually. This isn't something that we're a non-profit, so this isn't something we're trying to develop, with a view to selling to Instagram or anything like that. It's mainly being used, well, not being used, but it's getting a lot of interest from psychologists, and I think there's a few people doing research projects on it.
So David, you got a background in psychology, don't you?
No, I don't. I'd studied some at university, but
Well, that's what I meant, yeah, because I did as well.
no, my major at university was in anatomy and human dissection, and then I did a master's degree in chiropractic, actually. So I was a chiropractor for quite a number of years.
That's
But the psychology was an interest. But then Mandy is also, I met Mandy years ago, and she's, well, obviously a psychologist, but she's also a keen photographer. And that was the connection. So she's now with the Soho Gallery in New York. And so, yeah, we just work on just trying to create connections between creativity and specifically photography, and all of the really, really beneficial aspects of positive psychology. We're really in our infancy. We've only been going for a couple of years, but it's really interesting. And yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to that. It doesn't cost anything to take a look, and it's free for people to use.
Well, I mean, that could be a show in itself, I think, like looking at the
I'd love
psychology
to cover that, yeah.
Psychology and how it can
yeah.
affect well-being. Like that's not something, that's something I intuitively have been involved with my whole life, but not necessarily consciously or cognitively. From a research sort of point of view as well. Like that sounds fascinating.
Have a look at the research of Martin Seligman, because a lot of it is based on his work. He's at the University of Pennsylvania, has been for a very long time, and he's become a good friend as well. And he's sort of quite involved in everything. And yeah, it's just a really interesting thing to be involved in, and it's really good to, as we all know, really, it's good to volunteer our time to something. And it's even better almost when that thing is something that you're already really passionate about, and something that is not very standard, like it's brand new. It's like a new kind of crossover. We're sort of really finding our way, but it's so far.
What's the name of the website again, David, so people can look it up?
Seeing Happy, as in seeing.
Yeah.
Happy.
Yeah, I'll be having a look. I just went into the app and I had to log in, so I slowed down. But
yeah, right, yeah.
I'm quite fascinated, just in principle, about how I could maybe imbue some certain qualities or characteristics in my images, because I've used photography as a therapeutic tool in my wilderness therapy career for 17 years, and
right.
And I didn't necessarily do that from a psychological perspective, but certainly from a therapeutic one.
Yeah.
Self-identity and that kind of thing. But being more aware of what qualities to an image that can impact people in a positive way, I think would be a really beneficial thing for all of us. And we could maybe be more directive about that, or harness that a bit more.
Yeah. Actually, Mandy's written quite a bit on the website about, she articulates quite well. And she's got quite a few articles and references about how it was sort of trying to integrate. So
there's my dessert reading tonight. Good work.
Yeah, I think Mandy would be a good person to get on here too.
Okay,
yeah.
She would love that, and
it might be like a good panel show, maybe, David.
Yeah, that would be really good.
Yeah, like a panel discussion, and because I feel like we've hardly even scratched the surface of what we're talking about here, obviously.
No,
fair enough, because it's a Lapland show, but
I know.
At the same time,
I just wanted to touch on that, just because it's important to me, and
you've given us a good thread to carry on with too.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. So that's that. And
Well, and good on you for engaging your time into it as well, my friend.
oh no, it's if I'm busy, I might as well be busier and just get stuck in,
Want to get something done? Give it to a busy person.
just get stuck into things that are interesting, I think. You know, but yeah, thank you for having me on, and I'm
a
sorry
pleasure.
it's taken so long, but
It's taken a little while for a year or so.
but no, I really appreciate it, and I hope I didn't ramble on too much, and you've been interested.
Oh no, it's been great, and I
Images
personally
is so amazing.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Really good.
yeah, I've been super chuffed. Like the level of sort of authenticity you've given us an insight to into what it's actually like, and the physical experience of handling the temperatures, the culture, the really crazy cultural references to the auroras, and just the feeling of what it's like, the food, and which I wouldn't have even thought of actually.
Yeah,
So it's been really, really enlightening, mate. And I'm personally a little bit stoked because I'm heading in that northern direction in a few weeks myself, and wondering if it's going to start a journey like it has for you
yeah.
with my bloodline and stuff as well. So it's so I had a little bit of personal vested interest when you popped up on the radar as it being ready to roll. I was like, let's go. I want to get Dave on.
That's awesome.
And thank your family for letting us drag you away from them as well. I'm sure
No, that's fine.
somebody else was taking the load while you've been running the show with us tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, Kelly's fine. Oh, just one word of warning about Sweden, though. They can't make wine at all.
I can't do everything, mate. I'm sure they make some other things pretty
The
well.
wine's terrible.
But yeah, thanks, David. And
Yeah, thank
I'll
you.
put a personal invitation out to you for the Altitude South exhibition opening, which will be the 16th of June in Barossa.
Oh,
So
great.
we're literally
Okay.
flying straight back from the trip there. And if you've got the time to come out
Okay.
and enjoy the work, it'd be lovely to see you, man.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, it's not very far away from here. It's only an hour. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll send some details to you.
Okay, that'd be great.
It's a date. Bring some wine, mate.
Yeah, I'm not sure we'll need to. We'll just
Plenty of
raise
wine up
Luke-
there
Actually, no, we
Yeah,
won't
we'll
need to.
raise
William.
Luke's
You
family.
can help me choose some anyway to celebrate on the night.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. It's been wonderful.
And
All right,
yeah,
well,
thanks, Luke and Ben, for taking your time out tonight too.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, David. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah,
All right.
thank
Well, on
you.
that note,
Thank you.
thanks again, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time. See you guys.